Hi, Singapore. Thank you. So I know it's the evening. I know you guys saw that at 4:30 the bar opens, and I know you guys are like ready. Like one more talk later, I will have that cocktail. But I hope you find this useful, and I'm pretty sure you will if you work on the web. How many people here use the web? Give me a show of hands. Right? Everybody does, and that's why we're here. Because no matter what JavaScript, PHP, Ruby, whatever you use, even if you use like COBOL to write, right? Everybody uses internet. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about me, and I'll tell you about my use case, which might surprise you. So I work for Baker Hughes. Now you see GE over there, and you'll be surprised. Baker Hughes is the oil and gas division of GE. Oil and gas. So that little gasoline that you put into your vehicle, right? It's extracted from the earth. And do you know what I do on a day-to-day basis? I write code to make sure that oil is extracted from the earth efficiently. Now, you might be terrified to think, oh shit, JavaScript controls oil extraction. Don't worry, it does not. It only manages the visualization of data. We made sure of, we have quality control. Come on, people. So, but my point is, the web is everywhere. Think of any use case, any single part of your life, the web is there, and somebody has a website about it somewhere, right? So let's talk about our users. Where do your users come from? So if you use the internet, and I'm hoping everybody here has some part in creating the internet, you write it or you create content on the internet because you want people to consume it, right? Am I right? Yes. So if you want users to consume it, where do your users come from? So I was breaking it down, and these are the 3 highest users around the world. And now we have China, and I tried to find statistics, but none of that is valid because of reasons, so I'm going to skip that. And I'm going to focus on India, where I'm from, where I get access to easier statistics, and I'm going to compare that with the next largest country per users, which is the USA, and I'm going to show you a gap, right? So in India, we have 1,300 million, that's 1.3 billion people, and out of that, only 45% of India is connected to the internet, right? So 45% of 1.3 billion people is nearly 627 million users, and that's considering the people who use internet, right? Now let's look at the USA. The USA has almost 85% connected. Oh, I think the mic started working only now, my bad. And so by the start of how many users are there, we start to see the gap. Now, this is just a rough draft of the percentage of internet penetration. So when we say internet penetration, that's like how many people use the internet frequently enough to make a dent on the user percentages. And you can see the places with the largest number of people, when we come to South Asia or Southern Africa, right? That's the places with the lowest penetration of internet. And when we say lower penetration, the internet is not going away. That means the lower that number is, the higher is the opportunity for you and your product to go into those markets, right? So if you see that's the opportunity of people who have never used the internet before and have an idea or an interest in using the internet, that's where in the future your product will be used. So how can we make products that are targeted to those people, right? And you see the higher demographic, so you see Canada at 87%. That means a lot of people have seen what the internet is like, right? If they have an idea of the internet and they're happy with the tools that they already use or the products that they already use, what is the chance that they'll use your product? Unless yours is a very well-established product, right? So you have competition, which is more available. So let's look at these markets. So the market saturation of technical products, and this is what I was talking about, in the first world. And when I say the first world, I want you to think of places like Silicon Valley, right? So that's where the first Google came out of, the first Facebook came out of. That's where you think that technology started from there, right? And when you come to India, or when you come to South Asia, right, Facebook started in the Silicon Valley, and now the highest user base, whoopsie daisy, don't mind me, the largest user base is now India. So I read a very interesting statistic that Facebook right now has, in 2016, I believe, it had about 200 million users in the US, and India overtook it in 2016 with 400 million, um, and that was still only when there was 35% of India connected to the internet. Imagine what that number would be like if 70% of India connected, you know? Can you imagine that amount of data that Facebook can collect? Because that's what Facebook is thinking about. I think I broke this. Yikes. So my goal is to help you think about the larger picture, to find out a great balance in between performance, accessibility, and user experience. The big three when it comes to how a person decides to use your product. Now, the first come will be performance, but I'll show you how performance can actually be, it actually can be helped with accessibility and user experience. You don't have to compromise between the three. So the first and the easiest barrier, sometimes I feel, is internationalization. And I'd like to bring an example. Well, I checked, and I can't really find that example here, but a very valid example internationally. This is a very common company, right? Uber is dominant across the world. And you would think that Uber would care a little bit more about one of their largest consumer bases. Because the last time I checked, Uber still, there is local grown competition against Uber, but India is one of the largest markets for Uber. Now, can you tell me if something looks wrong in this picture? And I highlighted it for your ease. Unfortunately, my laser pointer is not working. So what I'd like to point out over here is that if you see Lithuania, right? And I'm not dumping on Lithuania here, but I think India has slightly larger number of people. And a lot more languages are supported in Lithuania than in India or in countries in Southern Africa, which is not good. Those are large countries with a diverse population, with a lot of people who don't speak English, right? So you want those companies who have large user groups in those areas to cater to communities in their own language. Imagine you're somebody who's not technically abled in your family. In my case, that's my grandfather. The first time my grandfather heard about Uber, he's like, what is this Uber? Why should I trust some guy to pick me up? Because he has never seen the internet before, So when my brother went to a different city and my grandfather wanted to go there, I'm sure you've all heard of Bangalore. So Uber is very strong in Bangalore. My grandfather wanted to go visit my brother in Bangalore, and then my brother said, it's very easy. You just open Uber, and then you'll be dropped right in front of my apartment. And what do you know? My grandfather could not figure out Uber. In the end, he just waited in the airport for 2 hours, and my brother had to make the trip. And if you know Bangalore traffic, you know he hated that trip. So if Uber had worked, they would have got some market. This is my key point. So for non-native speakers, for non-native English speakers, if you have a larger market, or if you have users, who, if you can change a slight tweak in your product, can help users. I don't know why it's not done so far, but this is the latest statistic I took maybe 3 months back from the Uber blog. So enabling native languages, it is very important to improve access. And it's not just, there are other parts of accessibility, of course, but for having languages is a different kind of accessibility that maybe you don't think about as much. And when it comes to Asia, we know there are different languages at play and different people at play. So I feel like internationalization is just a very easy barrier that you can cross to make your products that much more interesting for your users. And this is just adding it. If you're curious about how internationalization works, it's very easy. You can just add the language code. And most of the time, if you have those characters in Unicode, they should work. And there might be cases where, in specific, where a particular language does not work. That's outside the scope of my talk. This is just a starting point for you if you're interested in this. So the next story is where I really want to focus on, going beyond an iPhone or handling real-world devices. Now, I'm hoping this crowd will be a bit different, but I'm going to ask, how many people here does not have an iPhone? Your phone is not an iPhone. Nice. Nice. So I did a version of this talk in the USA, and I was very disappointed. There were maybe 2 hands because everybody else had an iPhone. But moving to Asia, this is not the case. Like at least the people in and around Asia would know that the Chinese manufacturing companies have pretty much a great market over here. If you have a price range, and in India, we are kind of price conscious, if you've heard about us, and if you can get all the features of an iPhone, 1/10 the price of an iPhone from a Chinese company like Huawei, we're gonna get the Huawei phone. And we're gonna put a sticker on top that has an Apple logo in it and claim it's an iPhone. That's how we do it. Honestly, I've seen that so many times. So real-world devices. Now, this is just the phones in my family. My phone is not listed because I used my phone to take a photograph. But I own an OnePlus, which is again a Chinese manufactured company. My mother, she's a proud owner of an iPhone. My grandfather could not care less. Like he has the second phone, which is a touchscreen, simply because he thought touchscreen was in. But he figured out that he could not handle the touchscreen, and he went back to his old phone anyway. And my father, again, he could not care less about his phone, so long as it works, the calling button. So basically, when you have such kind of devices, and more people are moving to a sort of standardization when it comes to such devices. There are more people moving to an iPhone, but the quantity of people or the market of an iPhone is still very, very, very small in Asia. So, but if you've ever seen the kind of checks for the sizes of screens that comes up, right? Mostly there's like a standard list which has a bunch of Apple devices, and maybe if you're lucky, a few Nexus or Google Pixels are supported, but a long list of other popular devices are not in the list. So you can create a kind of experience on mobile, but maybe it's not supported for the device, which is one of the most frequent ones. And I think Xiaomi has one of the largest selling phones, is the company that sells the most phones in India. And I've never seen a Xiaomi aspect ratio ever in the Google Chrome, in Google Chrome where you check how much your screen can be adjusted. So that is a big part. And if you have, if you're creating a product to be used in phones, I have to stress this enough. Hardware is created unequal. Forget the screen sizes. You can also have really bad RAM. You have really bad expectations of what a device can do. How much speed in which your device can load, how much the size, the width, and all that is. So hardware in general, if you're only going to create it for a few specific devices, that again creates a block for your users. Please don't do that. Please think of at least the top 5 devices in the market that you're going into, which are being sold, and just test for them. Okay? And the best thing that you can do is to get a bunch of bang-up phones, with the screen cracked. I'm sure a few of you here have few screen-cracked phones. Check with those. Check and see how well your website does in those, and see what are the results. Performance-wise and accessibility-wise, check with unequal devices. Yeah, so if you have seen the previous slide, you've seen what my grandfather's phone looks like. Now, my grandfather, he owns a bunch of property because he's the head of the household. And very, very recently, one of his friends told him about this website called Airbnb. Yeah. And he wanted me to load Airbnb in that second phone. That was a task. Yeah. And I thought I could do it, but I found out I couldn't. So, and you would think that a company as well-established, unicorn, like Airbnb, would care a little bit more. And I tried to take a photo of that, but it came up really bad. And I did not want to scar your eyes with that. That's why I did not put that photo in. But let me tell you, it's so surprising the way things turn out, So if you are creating a product for mobile, just check it for the mobiles that are really popular. Your average best-selling Xiaomi's and Oppo phones should be enough. They would do the trick, but go the extra mile, right? And one more thing is I'd like to talk about using JavaScript frameworks. Now, all of us know some cool JavaScript framework or the other. I'm pretty sure a lot of you know about a JavaScript framework that I've never heard of before. I've recently heard a joke like there are some JavaScript frameworks that last less than a milk product. It's probably true. So if you have a latest and a greatest JavaScript framework that you have to try out, I again would like you to go to the same rule. Build your website in that JavaScript framework and then see how much time it takes to load on a crappy phone. Maybe it works well on an iPhone, but please do not let the iPhone be your benchmark. Please run it on something with less than 2 GB of RAM and see how well your mobile website performs on that phone. Because the majority of users who use the internet are coming in from mobile. This is especially true if you run a website that has video in it. Now, from my understanding and my research, most users who connect through mobile internet, especially in local languages, non-English languages, they try to access video. So if you have a video loading element, try to make it as performant as possible for the lower RAM mobile phones. Because that is where your demographic is, what your demographic is trying to access. That's what they want the most speed for, and that is where you're letting them down so long. Now, if you have great performance on mobile for video, excellent. And at the risk of violating the code of conduct, I'll tell you a model that you should definitely be following. That's Pornhub. If you have ever tried to use that in mobile, in Indian mobile data, you would know what I'm talking about. And some people are laughing because I know you've tried it, Because if you've ever used that mobile website, they know who their audience is, and that's a very performant website on really crappy 2G data. You should try it. Nice. And that leads into, the Wi-Fi, the third story that I would like to tell you. So the definition of Wi-Fi in India is 10 Mbps to 300 Mbps. That's the actual. So you see that there's slightly a bit of a variation. And this, I was surprised that there was 3. In my mind, I thought, whoa, that would be 1. But surprisingly, it's 3. So instinctively, I knew that no matter what the definition for Wi-Fi was still pretty bad. And you think about it, we have 1.3 billion people crammed into one small location on the map. So definitely, if you have a Wi-Fi connection, your family is taking it, your neighbors are probably taking it, and then the neighbors below you are also taking it. So that's the reason why it's so slow, because so many people are trying to access your 3.5 Mbps connection. That's a fact. Now, add this with the previous point about how, again, the phones are small, they don't have RAM, and they can't use your website. Now you realize why your website performance is so important, because that's the kind of scenario you're in. So not only is the device playing against you, but infrastructure in general, right? The amount of network poles around your location, the amount of bandwidth available for your users to use. Because at the end of the day, if your website does not load, then it's not good. Now, I've not included it here, but I do have a very, I did not include it here because I don't want Microsoft suing me, but if you ever try to load LinkedIn in India in 2G, you should try it. It's an experience where after 30 seconds you give up and you're like, I don't need a resume, I don't need a job anymore, I'm not opening LinkedIn. That's what happens. So how does your website perform in 3G, 2G, or in those H+? I don't know if anybody here has gotten an H+ ever. I get it time to time. These days, less frequently. Thankfully, I'm from a part of India that's blessed with more network connections, but the more you go to a rural area, you're going to see your H+ and 2Gs. So how does your website perform in those lower bandwidths? So again, if you use one of the major browsers, there's probably a network throttling option for you to check this. I'm sure most of you do this, but I advise you to do that again. Just cover your bases and make sure that your product has a fallback. So Uber, which I mentioned earlier, even though their internationalization is pretty bad, they have an app called Uber Lite in India, and that actually works. What they did is they took out the map, which actually choked down most of the data in Uber, so you can't see the map where the little car goes around. You have to guess where the car is. You have to divine it. Oh, it's probably there, but it works. It actually loads in real time. So what if the map does not exist? Uber works. That's good. At H plus, that's pretty good. So So test your website on crappy phones with slow speeds. If you forget everything else from this talk, this is the most important sentence for you today. Please test your website on really crappy phones with really slow speeds. That's the only thing you have to do to make sure that your product works in Asia. If that happens, then your product, at least from a technical standpoint, you have covered your grounds. So how can I simplify my website? Now I know what the problem is. How do I fix it? Minimum number of downloads on the first click. Now this is basic performance stuff. The amount of libraries, videos, images, all that you download in the first click, that is a huge drag on what the first paint or what the user sees first. So if you can minimize the number of downloads, excellent. If you know that a click is coming up and you can preload parts of it, again, excellent. The biggest gulpage of video that comes in, what chokes in your data the most in any website or in any application is video. If you can optimize your video and images, it's nothing like it. It's the best way to make your product faster. Now, I don't know if somebody has covered SVG again over here, but I'm pretty sure there's a great talk by Una Kravitz in the last JSConf.Asia about SVG, which I suggest everybody check out, because if you can use SVGs instead of your images, again, a great part in optimizing your websites. And a little bit more about user experience, because I feel that's one of the most important parts. At the end of the day, no matter how well built your product is, how much the engineering team likes it, if your user does not like your product, then what good is it? At the end of the day, the product comes as what the user likes it to be. How well we build it is based on what marketing tells us that what the users like, right? So let's make marketing happy with a little bit bonus point. So this is something I like to add, and this is something from my personal experience. Like I said, my grandfather is very adventurous when it comes to technology, and this happened the first time that he opened up his Gmail account. Now, he was very worried that he would not understand what Gmail is and how to navigate it, but thankfully the gods of Google have decided that a lot of people don't know what Gmail is, so they have a little bit of a demo happening, and there are a few great applications which has this kind of a demo feature, and I really like it. And I'd like to stress that if you're creating a product for the Asian market, for people who have never used the internet before, the demo is a pretty good way to go. Because if you're looking for a group of people who have never seen the internet, right? So imagine this. There are people who see the save button, who've never seen a floppy disk before, and they identify a floppy disk as, oh, this is the 3D printed image of a save button. It's pretty much the same thing for our elders when they see the internet, right? So they have no reference point to this. They've never seen anything like the internet before. So when they see a hamburger button for the first time, for example, they don't know what to do with it. They don't know that just clicking it would open up the menu, right? So if you have a small arrow pointing to it, telling you, hey, click this, it opens up the menu. That's good for your users. So based on what the target demographic is, I would suggest that you at least have, at least on the first load or the first time a user signs in, you have a little demo mode showing them what each of the things does. And that really helps. And it helps to explain the major moving parts of. And one more thing I'd like to add, probably again a bonus point, is that there are people, at least in India where I come from, there are people who are illiterate, right? So there are people, even if you write it in their native language, they're not good at reading, right? So if you can have icons explain, sorry, if you can have icons or some kind of drawings that explain what it does without having to read it. Now, text is important in some cases, but having a good icon makes its difference too. So I'd like to stress that having that a little bit of a bonus user experience wise, showing people where things are done, it really helps for the older generation or people who are just not used to technology. So in summary, or yes, only 5 more minutes left. So in summary, what are the things that you have to do to make your websites better for a new user group? Internationalization of your website, which means supporting different languages, maybe the major languages of any market or any demographic that you're hoping to attract. Optimize it for like non-standard aspect ratios. I'd like to stress upon that eloquent line that I said. Test your website on crappy phones with slow speeds. That's it. And for slow speeds, have fallbacks. When you have slow internet, make sure your app does something instead of breaking into a small broken image, icon. And that's it. That is me on the interwebs. You can probably find me somewhere around for the next 2 days, and I hope this has been useful. Thank you, Singapore.